No, I don't think that what's described as an insan al-kamil, I don't think that the complete human is something that's within the grasp for most people. I don't think it's supposed to be. I think that most discussions of the complete human are meant to be aspirational. That is, it's meant to help you understand that there is this potential in you. You will never reach it. A person might not ever reach it. But isn't the fact that, let's say, that you know that that potential is within every human being, won't that at least help you be better than what you currently are? Yes.
So, welcome, Doctor. And today we'll have a talk about different areas and topics related to Sufi. So, Doctor, some philosophers of religion would describe the situation in the West by saying that a human being has been replaced to a mechanical machine. And this is based on the materialistic cosmic view, which equals the human being to nature and other creatures, such as planets and animals, and neglect spiritual, virtuous, beauty dimensions. So do you agree with this description, or you feel that it's very مبالغة, we say, it's extreme, I mean?
The entire idea that nature is mechanical is, I hope, even scientifically debunked, right? And there's if you think about like physics and the way that physicists see the world today as opposed to how they saw it, let's say 150 years ago, so much of that, that enlightenment hope that the universe makes sense in some human way, I think has been thrown out the window, and for good reason. And not just in the realm of physics, but hopefully in all the sciences, people are beginning to see that well, the best understanding we can have of the world is still a limited one. It's shaped by the capabilities and the way of knowing things that are particular to human beings. So why then would we assume that knowing a human being would be any different from that? And that even knowing ourselves, the way we perceive, the way we understand, the way we think, would be any different from understanding the universe, and that we could have some, very clear picture of the way things work. It's only a kind of hubris, a kind of arrogance.
Whereas when we see the style of writing in Quran, Rumi, or Hafid even, or Attar, and in major Sufi poetry and literature, we see many stories. So what's the mystery and the secret of the language that stories hold? Is it for children only, or the most deep wisdom can only be found in such stories?
Well, so if you think about what a story really is, what a narrative is, what's the difference between, let's say, if you've ever, put it like this, if you've ever read like police reports, okay, of something that's happened, an event, it'll be, at 4 p.m. this happened, this at 7 p.m. this happened, this, and they're sort of what we call facts, scattered facts. And then later you read about that same event, but in what a journalist has written in what we call a story, right? An account of it. And what happens is there's a kind of transformation in that in the first one, there's scattered facts that don't make sense on their own. They don't have any meaning to them on their own, right? What the journalist has done in now presenting it as a news item, as a story with a title, is that they've made sense of it for you. They've told you why it matters. It's not just that this happened before that. There's the human element. Who was affected by it? How were they affected? And what you begin to realize anytime you read any sort of narrative, whether it's fiction or not, is that it's really the human act of making sense of the world. We make sense of the world through a narrative. It's a narrative is a kind of argument, but it's in a sense purer than any argument. It has a sense of purity to it because it reflects the way we live our lives, right? So if I, in a novel, for example, what's the difference between doing, let's say, philosophy in a novel and making some sort of, philosophy in some sort of, typical argumentative form? Well, the typical work of philosophy is useful because you can prove and disprove it. You can debate about it And that's the proper way of doing philosophy. But if you're trying to make a philosophical point through a novel, the difference is that what comes into play are the various perspectives of the characters. Each character in the story comes at it with their own view of the world. There become these sort of multiple truths, multiple perspectives, multiple sympathies that we have. And that's closer to how we live in the world. That's closer to reality than the, step-by-step, let's prove a point kind of argument. I'm not trying to, by the way, set aside philosophy. I'm saying that there's something about the novel and the philosophical perspectives in it that changes and is different. Now, which part of philosophy deals with real human circumstances? Ethics, moral philosophy. You can make a perfect argument about what's right and what's wrong and what you should do in this situation, what you should do in that situation. But everybody knows that when you're in the situation, it's different. When you're actually in the situation and you're dealing with it and you're hearing this and you're seeing that, the decisions that you make change. It's different. That is reflected best, it would seem, in storytelling because of the multiple perspectives and the situations that are involved, right? Now, typically, those who've studied the novel have pointed out, rightly so, that it's a modern phenomenon. You don't have a pre-modern novel. I mean, in fact, some people define the onset of modernity by the appearance of the novel. But I would say that you see the seeds of it, and you see it coming to be. I mean, really, the ideas are there in a lot of pre-modern writings. And one of them I pointed out in the Polished Mirror in chapter 10. I do a case study of Maulana Rumi's Masnavi, a story from it about a Sufi and a judge. It's a beautiful, beautiful, interesting story. But it's not just the fact that Rumi's telling the story. It's that in the story, he acknowledges that there's multiple perspectives, multiple views of what might be right and ethical and make sense. So that, again, going back to what we said about Ibn Arabi, it's not so much that there's one truth or one reality, but that there's preferences. There's what's better, what's more wise. I mean, I could summarize it for you real quickly if you want. I don't know if you'd like me to get into it more. Yeah, so the basics of the story are simple. There's a man who's not wealthy and not healthy. He's in fact, he doesn't know it at the time, but he's close to death. The doctor comes to visit him, and the doctor knows this, sees this person is really beyond any kind of treatment, and feeling bad for him, says, well, listen, your cure is just do whatever you want. Now, what he really means is do whatever you want is just enjoy your life because you really only have a little while left. But this man takes it very literally and thinks that his cure lies in that any impulse that he has to do anything he has to act upon. So he sets out one day walking by the seaside or the riverfront, and he sees a Sufi who's making wudu, washing himself. And he has this impulse to slap him. So thinking that he must act out every impulse that he has, he slaps him on the back of the neck. Well, the Sufi gets very upset and drags this poor old man to the Qadi, to the judge. And what's beautiful is that what ensues is you begin to see what courtrooms, if you want to call them that, what litigation looked like in 13th century Muslim majority, or where he lived in Konya and elsewhere, what it looked like. And it's fascinating because the Qadi, and we know this about the way that the Qadis work, the Qadi isn't basing his decision on sort of universal premises or some codified law. And that's what we would expect, right? We would expect the Qadi says, okay, I looked here and, statute this and this and law this and this says I must do. It's not like that at all. He listens to both sides and he makes a determination. And he sees that this man is poor unhealthy. So at first he wants to let him go, but the Sufi will have none of it. The interesting thing is that the Sufi is the one in this story who's always pushing the letter of the law. He says, listen, according to the law, this man needs to be punished. According to the law, this man. But the Qadi is trying to be more flexible. So in the story, actually, the Qadi represents wisdom. He represents forbearance. The Sufi represents a sort of narrow, rigid interpretation of Islamic law. So he says, okay, fine. He only has to give you a small amount. It's just a number of small coins. And then the sick man gives, he says, oh, that was nothing. And he sees the back of the Qadi's neck. And then he has the urge. He says, well, now that it's so cheap, he slaps the Qadi on the back of the neck. And the beautiful thing about that is that it allows Rumi to then change the discourse. Because at first what happened is that the judge was an observer. Right? The judge was an observer making some decision the way we do. But what happens in the story is he's pushed. The Qadi is pushed into the story. And now he too is a victim. So we get to see, okay, how is his decision-making process different when he's also, hurt? It's a fascinating account. But again, what it does is it lets us see this, let's call it Islamic virtue ethics at work, right? The decisions made are never really about the law. They're never like Sharia, this, they're not fiqhi. They're not about like what any madhab or something like that says. That's a very small part. The only person who really cares about that is the Sufi in this story. What they are about is about wisdom, kindness, sympathy. What is the best course of action depends on a sense of understanding everybody's situation. The Sufi, the sick man, everyone's situation comes into play, right? It's a very beautiful account. And I think that's something that you can't get outside of telling a story. Right? I can tell you.
So in summary, Doctor, you mean that in the style of storytelling, it's not about only being more persuasive or being more influensive. It's about understanding the reality from all its dimensions in a better way. Yeah,
it's recognizing that humans, as much as they like universal law and as much as they like universals and that was as in ethics, that was the trend, and still for many it is the trend, is to try to come up with sort of laws or formula to make ethical decisions. But the reality of the way most people live their lives is that they're trying to be a good person. They're trying to live according to a certain model of what they imagine a good person would be. That's how most people make their decisions. And there are times when universal law and principles definitely come into play. I'm not saying that they don't, but what you get out of the story is not unlike, I think, the way that we manage our lives on a daily basis.
So, Doctor, here I'd like to impose a question, and you may answer in a summary about love and the role of love, because Sufis all the time they talk about the love as a major scene in their theories, in their ideas. So we talked about fitra and we talked about ethics. So the path of love that they talk about, is it only for very elite, special people, awliya and urafa, or no? It's a power that can drive many different people in their life of fitra and ethics and daily life.
That's the beauty of the path of love, is that it's very egalitarian. I mean, if you look at the heroes that the Sufi poets valorize in when it comes to the school of love or the way of love, who is it, right? It's people like Majnun. It's people like the famous story of the Sheikh of San'an, though he was a sheikh and an established person, but it's about people who are willing to even give up their status for that. Anyone who can fall in love is and that's everybody, is welcome to the path of love. But there's an important difference, is that to know, so here's the thing. Anybody who falls in love undergoes an experience, undergoes something that is exactly what the Arif is trying to get at, right? They're trying to get at losing yourself, not caring what other people think, being absorbed constantly in the thought of the beloved. That sense of focus, that sense of selflessness, that sense of liberation, being free, right? A person who's in love doesn't care what they eat. They don't care if they have money or not. All they care about is the beloved, okay? So if you look at it as that, then it's the same whether a person's in love with a human or with God. But the difference is, if a person can understand that the ultimate reality of all beloveds, that the thing that everyone actually loves is perfection, completion, what makes us whole, then they begin to realize that it's the real, it's God, that is the true beloved. And if they can make that connection, then it's open to anybody. It's open to everyone, right? But it's the ability to make that connection, right? And in the poet, if you read the poet Nizami, there's hints of that in his version of the story of Layla and Majnun. There's some hints of that in that story, that Majnun is able to make that connection. But in reality, is it open to everyone? Yes. I'll give you an example. So you're probably familiar with there's a hadith that praises the religion of old women, Din al-Ajaiz, right? This is very important in Sufi literature. Why? Because of this very point. What is it that quote unquote old women in that pre-modern context would have? I mean, nowadays it doesn't apply, right? When women are going to universities at a higher rate than men very often. But in that time, the idea was that the old woman was unlettered, simple. That was the idea of what an old woman was. Why is her religion the one that's valued? This becomes actually a topic in the poetry of Attar. It's because of the absolute sincerity of that person. That person knows God in the simplest of ways, but has a true and sincere love for God in all that they do. And it's not sullied or sort of mixed with ego and trying to outdo others or have some sort of spiritual rank or scholarly rank. That has nothing to do with it. The stereotypical in the pre-modern context old woman has no interest in that. She knows she's simple and she's fine with it. And so that's, I think, in a way, the religion of love, the school of love, is actually connected to the old woman, the old woman figure, and it is very much in Attar's case connected to the person of Rabia, who's the epitome of someone who's in love with God on the one hand, but has a simple view of things that others even begin to envy, because it's through her simplicity that she's able to outdo all the men around her